be here. I'm beyond honored and flattered to be talking to the first roundtable ever formed in the United States. And I told my wife, I said, when I get done tonight, if I walk out on Manhattan Road and get hit by a bus, I'll die with a smile on my face, but just be sure to put on my tombstone, he spoke to the Chicago Roundtable. And then she hits me for don't say stupid things like that. Things happen. But I'm glad to be here. I have a number of friends at the round table we've gotten to know over the years. I don't know who that guy is, but Paul is fabulous and Bruce is fabulous. That guy is Matt. And a number of other folks we've got to know, and saw many of you on our Clarksville tour last year. Come on back sometime. I've been asked by a number of people, when am I going to do my next Cairo, Columbus, Belmont, Mountain City. I work for myself on another career besides being a military historian. I've been unbelievably busy after being sick for the first month of the year. And so I'm playing catch-up ball, maybe Memorial Day weekend. I'll put the feeler out, and if I get enough takers, we'll do it on that weekend. We can go see. If you can't understand Vicksburg, Henry Donelson, etc., until you go to Cairo. You just can't. When you stand on the tip of the Union Spear, that is the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, and see where that spear is pointing, which is right down the Mississippi River, and then jiggle it to the left a little bit. How many people realize that when you're in Cairo, Illinois, you were on the Virginia North Carolina state line? That's how far south you are. That's south. And I'm the only member of my family. I was born in Elmhurst. All the rest of my family are Southern Illinoisans. My dad was from Carbondale, or as I like to call it, Confederate Illinois. I remember going down there as a little kid. My grandparents lived in Ewing, and hearing as many Southern accents, because I grew up in Georgia, as any part of Georgia that I've ever lived. And then you dig into the history of it, it's all Tennesseans and Kentuckians that settled Southern Illinois because of the farmland, et cetera, et cetera. So I haven't lived up there in a long time, but I'm still a big Blackhawks fan. My wife's a Preds fan. We sit on opposite ends of the couch when the two teams play. And so go Hawks, and hopefully we'll get another cup here either this year or sometime really soon after that. But I'm also a big Georgia Bulldogs fan because I grew up in Georgia. And we'll talk about that as the program goes on. I have a little bit about that. But Nashville, the Siren song of the Confederacy. I'm a Western theater guy. And it dawned on me about 8 or 9 years ago that Nashville lured the Confederates to it 5 times. The sirens of ancient Greece, the Homeric sirens of the Iliad and the Odyssey, particularly the Odyssey. And as Cindy said, I start my interest in military history with the ancient Greeks because life's too short to like one war. And that's why I have 2,500 military history books. So I probably got 10 on the Spartans alone, and then I moved forward. And when I was a Boy Scout, we were in the Spartan Patrol. We didn't grow our hair long, or torture ourselves. We did not yell in pain, etc. We did kill the Persians a lot, but and other Greeks. So it was a lot of fun. But thank God for the Greeks because they gave us nudity, and I've been trying to figure out how to put a naked woman in a program for about 30 years. I now can do it. So thank you, Greeks. And this is supposed to represent one of the sirens. It's an inaccurate representation of the sirens, and we'll get to that in a second. But it dawned on me that it's a siren song. That when Nashville falls on February 25th, 1862, it will sing a song to the Confederates that say, "Come and get me." And it's going to dictate Confederate military strategy for the rest of the war in the Western theater. Now, I'm going to be like George Lucas. When we did the first Star Wars movie started as Part 4. And I remember in 1977 watching it saying Part 4. Where's Parts 1, 2, and 3? So I actually do a predecessor program that I did after this one. So if you like this one, maybe you might have me back for that one, because I talk about the fall in Nashville and the Great Panic and stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit. So I took a George Lucas page out of this. So here we are, the Homeric Odyssey, the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's Odysseus, or Ulysses if you're English, tied to the mast, and the sirens who had the heads of women and the bodies of birds singing their sweet songs. So if you know about the Trojan War, the Iliad is the Greeks going to take Troy to get that hot Spartan queen back that had been kidnapped by one of the Trojan guys. It was actually about who controlled the Dardanelles. The hot Spartan queen was just the catalyst. And so the Greeks are sailing all the way back to Greece from Troy. Does anybody know where Troy was? It was in western Turkey on the Dardanelles. It's not that far. There was no celestial navigation back then, so you navigated your ships within sight of the lands. And it took them how many years to get from Troy back to Greece? It's, were you on MapQuest? I mean, they had my house on the wrong street for 3 years by the time I got it figured out. So they stop at the island of Circe and to get refreshment and wine and things, and they ask, what's ahead of us? And Circe says, oh, it's the land of the Sirens, the island of the Sirens. They destroy ships, with their songs, they lure merchantmen, and their ships are smashed on the rocks. You're never going to make it. So Odysseus wisely says, we'll put wax in the ears of all my men, tie me to the mast. I want to hear this. So here he is, tied to the mast, and they're sailing, by just in the black waves, in complete ignorance and through, while the Sirens are out tempting him, and as the story goes, he's writhing on the mast because the music is so sweet, and everybody makes it safely back to Greece. So that is my allegory between the actual Confederate Western strategy and the ancient Greeks. So if you don't like that allegory, let's kick it up to about 7 or 8 centuries from now. Nashville, the Klingon tractor beam of the Confederacy. I love the Birds of Prey. They're the most awesome spaceships ever. They really were. And if you've seen the movie Trekkies about the guys who go to Star Trek conventions, there's a great scene in there where guys all in Klingon regalia ordering in Klingon at a McDonald's. It's great. You look at the camera, don't fries with that. Don't. They've got the whole book. You can learn the whole Klingon language. People have way too much time on their hands. I wish I had that much time on my hands. I'm going to saunter away a little bit because we have to talk about Tennessee geography, map location, Kentucky geography and map location, and why Tennessee and Kentucky are getting slammed by Union military offensives. They share a common border and they share a common geographic position in the United States. They border the absolutely insignificant Eastern Theater where nothing happened for 4 years, which you'll learn when you go there next week. They border the somewhat significant Trans-Mississippi because of logistical reasons, coming over the Trans-Mississippi, and they're in the heart of the Western Theater. So there you go. No other state does these besides these 2 states. Now the interesting thing about Kentucky is in April 1861, Governor Brian McGoffin, the pro-South governor, and he's dealing with a pro-North legislature just like Governor Clifford Jackson of Missouri is dealing with, raises the 1st Kentucky Battalion and sends them off to Virginia to fight for the Confederate military. His Unionist legislature goes ape. And that's not going to fly here. So they will start to raise the Union Home Guard of Kentucky. Now the Constitution of all 50 states states that the Commander-in-Chief of state military forces is the governor of that state. Brian McGoffin commands the Kentucky State Guard, which formed in 1860. The best equipped and drilled militia in the United States. These were the Kentucky Blue. They had Enfield rifles, ladies and gentlemen, imported from England. That's how good they were and how well equipped they were. So the Kentucky legislature is creating a competing military source. How's that going to shake out? Because that's going to be pro-Union. The bulk of the Kentucky State Guard is pro-Southern, and in fact will leave and become Confederates, the gist of the Orca Brigade and a few of the other units. Then in May of 1861, Kentucky decided to declare itself Switzerland, minus the chocolate, the gold, and the fine watches, and all the world's money. But they had bourbon and horses. So they declare themselves neutral and tell both sides, stay the heck out of the bluegrass. We don't want either side there. And the Kentucky State Guard is to prevent Union military incursions into the state of Kentucky. That doesn't happen anywhere else. You've got a couple other states that try to set it out, but it doesn't happen anywhere else. So what happens is the Union men of Kentucky will go across the river, cross from Louisville to Jeffersonville, Indiana, and start to form units there. They will go just outside Cincinnati and start to form units there. The Confederate guys will come to my town. Here I am, last train to Clarksville. Guess where the town that song got written about. And they will form the Orphan Brigade just north of Clarksville on the Tennessee state line, but south of the Kentucky state line. And a handful of Kentuckians will come over here in the Union City area and form a couple units over that way. So that's keeping to the intent of the neutrality. Now, a lot of historians like to put pin the tail on the Leonidas Polk donkey on September 3rd, 1861, when he advances from Union City, takes Hickman, Kentucky, and then Columbus, Kentucky, because it sits on bluffs about 175 feet above the Mississippi River on the 4th Chickasaw Bluff, as it's called. And they said that collapses Kentucky's neutrality. Well, thankfully, there have been a couple books recently that got it right, because in the first week of August of 1861, right here at Camp Dick Robinson, formed Kentucky Union regiments. 3 weeks before Polk moves into Kentucky. A clear, blatant violation of Kentucky neutrality. Not to mention the Union timberclads that are sailing into the harbors of Paducah and stealing ships and things of that nature. Kentucky owns the Ohio River. They still do, by the way. I want to be that lawyer that negotiated that case. That way, because they only get half the Mississippi River. They own the Ohio River. And when I was living in Ohio up until 12 years ago, there's a marina east of Cincinnati that's actually, because it goes within 10 feet of the shoreline of the state boundaries. And the bulk of the marina was in Kentucky, and Kentucky was trying to charge the boat owners license fees.
Well, if that's the case, why is it called the Kentucky River?
Comes from Virginia. That used to be Virginia. This used to be North Carolina. It goes way back, well before my time. But yeah, good point. But because the Ohio country is what it was called. So that's why. Camp Dick Robinson, so the governor, McGoffin, sends an email to Lincoln and says, what's up with this? I thought we had this neutrality thing going. You told me in July you were going to honor the neutrality thing. Why are you not honoring the neutrality thing? And Lincoln sends an email back to the gist of, I can't understand you're complaining about this, that these men would muster to defend your state. Conveniently not telling about the 1st and 2nd Tennessee U.S. regiments that were also forming there at the same time. The guys from eastern Tennessee came to the mountains in dribs and drabs and formed the 1st and 2nd Tennessee U.S. The guys that will fight at Mill Springs and Rockfield and all those places in eastern Kentucky in the fall of '61. So between those two things, Kentucky's neutrality falls down. It's a house of cards. It's never going to last. Why? Where's Kentucky? Where's the North? Where's the Confederacy? We have to get through there to get to here. If you look at the official records, August 28, 1861, John C. Fremont, the then department commander in St. Louis of the Missouri, Grant's boss, smartest thing he ever did in the entire war was appoint Grant for district of Cairo. He orders a Union column to go to Belmont and then cross the river and capture Columbus. Governor Morton of Indiana, we need to get troops across the river and get Columbus. It's just who moves first. So it was just a matter of time before it happens. The collapse of Kentucky neutrality causes Tennessee a major problem because when Tennessee secedes on June 8, 1861, last date to the party, they tried a plebiscite in February, was voted down. The legislature passed a plebiscite or a ordinances session in May, but it went to the people for voting. That's why the vote was on June 8th. It was overwhelming to do so. In fact, I think our county, there were 3 people that voted against it. I think they were summarily hung or chased away or something. So when Tennessee raises its troops, it becomes student body left. Everybody runs to the Mississippi River. Why? Greatest avenue of commerce in the United States then and now. I had the Cleveland Roundtable down in Clarksville and Fort Donelson about 3 or 4 years ago. And they're used to seeing the big warships out of the Great Lakes. You probably see them off Chicago and stuff. They were stunned when we were at Cairo. There were 300 to 400 barges parked at Cairo, moving past Cairo. And that's just a fraction of what moves on those rivers. In 1860, 1,000 steamboats plied the Ohio-Mississippi River Valley. 1,000 steamboats. New Orleans then and now, the #1 export port in the United States. The crops of Middle America still go down the river, put out big ships, and go off to the world from New Orleans. And that's the way it was back then. So now you've got the Mississippi River corked up to here, and then eventually to Columbus, and the Confederates take that. And what are those Illinois and Iowa and Wisconsin and Minnesota farmers that can't get their crops to a railhead, or they're close to a river, they get their crops to market that way? What are they going to do? They're going to get on the phone and call their congressman. What up with this? We got to get our problem. I'm going to feed my family. The congressman get a whole bunch of these. He's going to walk down the road to the White House, get out and Lincoln, knock on Lincoln's door, and say, all my constituents are going to starve because they can't get their crops to market. So when Winfield Scott does the Anaconda Plan blockading the Confederate coastline, the tweak of it is an offensive to reopen the Mississippi River to get the commerce flowing back through the South. The Confederates realized that, particularly Isham Harris, the governor of the state of Tennessee, who you are taught when you live there, secedes and takes Tennessee with him. True story. So they will build a chain of forts starting from Memphis. You got Fort Pickering, Fort Randolph, Fort Pillow, there was a Fort Harris, and then island number 10, New Madrid, Missouri, pronounced Madrid by the way, Tiptonville, and then they'll eventually extend their fortification, up to Columbus. And they're not that worried about the 2 other rivers that flow through the deep south. Mississippi here, Tennessee here, Cumberland here, depot navigable to about that point. Tennessee River depot navigable to Florence, where the Muscle Shoals are. That way crews would stop at the Muscle Shoals, they'd go in there and cut some records with Isaac Hayes and Sam Day and people like that. And go back and get on their boats and fly north and put them out and hopefully sell a million records. Pop culture joke, guys, come on, Muscle Shoals Recording Studio. Very famous, still a museum. I think Grant got a record there too. So they start to look at these other two rivers. Well, we've got these other avenues of invasion. How many have read Two Great Rebel Armies by Richard McMurray? Brilliant book. If you have not read it, run right now. I'll wait. Go to the bookstore, pick it up, wherever your Barnes & Noble is. What's that?
My house is closed.
You're okay. Go borrow Rob's copy. He'll read this paragraph aloud. The rivers in the Eastern Theater go east-west, so the Confederates can hide behind the rivers, except at Rappahannock Station, November '63, where he loses 2 brigades quite stupidly. In the Western Theater, they go north and south. They're the interstate highways. So they're bisecting your east-west running line of defense, which is going to run from the Cumberland Gap, eventually up here to Bowling Green, down to Clarksville, Henry Donelson, and then go anchored on Columbus. So they bisect those lines of defense that are going to be built. So the Tennesseans go, okay, we better do something. So they get a guy named Adna Anderson, who's a civilian engineer. He's the engineer, the railroad's not on the map, it's the Edgefield, Kentucky Railroad that runs from Clarksville to Nashville, actually the town of Edgefield. If you've been to Nashville, where Nissan Stadium is, where the Tennessee Titans try to play football or something, I don't do the NFL, but any SEC team other than Vanderbilt outdraws the NFL. Because we know where good football is. That was Edgefield. That was a separate town back then. So the railroad there from Edgefield up to Graysville on the Tennessee state line. He was a civilian railroad engineer, and he gets sent out to try to site some forts. He sites Fort Donelson, and then he sites where Fort Henry was going to be, and then Daniel Donelson, the state military engineer, will go out afterwards and approve the Donelson site, and then, not like the Fort Henry site, he moves it 8 miles north from a nice high hill, where I could show you today, see, if you're looking at that nice high hill, we'd be looking at Fort Henry. Now it's 20 feet underwater because he put it on a floodplain. Never a good thing to do with your forts, but that's what they do. And that's going to cork up the rivers, they hope. 2 things, has to be below the Tennessee-Kentucky state line, neutrality still, and above the Memphis-Clarksville-Louisville Railroad, one of the 2 nominally east-west railroads of the Confederacy, the main one being the Memphis and Charleston, the real spine of the Confederate logistics effort. So that's why the forts are sited in better places up in Kentucky, not until the Kentucky situation is resolved. So the Tennesseans will start to react to that, and they will start building forts. And then Sidney Johnson shows up in September '61 to take command of Department Number 2, which is basically all of this. And he issues orders from Nashville, and then after the fall of Columbus, he will advance his center because the line kind of goes concave, giving the Union interior lines up to Bowling Green to straighten it out and put a garrison at Russellville, and then in Clarksville, etc. He issues orders like a good corporate guy should do, but unlike a good corporate guy, not see if they're being followed. I issue orders that Nashville shall be fortified, he says to Major Jeremy Gilmer, his chief engineer. And Gilmer runs down to Nashville, goes, I've been ordered to build fortifications. Nashville's going, we got Bowling Green, we got Clarksville, we got Henry Donelson, we don't do that stuff here. Even though there's beautiful places to fortify Nashville, both north and on the river. And Sidney Johnston never comes to see if the orders are obeyed. When he shows up in Nashville with the fall of Fort Donelson, he's shocked. What's all these forts I talked about? Small 8-gun battery built to the bend of the river, Nashville right here at the bend of the river, Fort Zollicoffer, and that's it. That's all that gets built. So that's our problem, our situation prior to the fall of Nashville on February 25th. Clarksville, Fort Henry, February 6th, Fort Donelson, February 16th, my town, February 19th. The same Cairo that shows up in Nashville took our town. And then here's Don Carlos Buell, one of your quiz questions. And here's the flag of the 6th Ohio. The flag that was raised over our state capitol. There's Public Square. That's a different Ohio regiment depicted there. Public Square is still Public Square, but doesn't look anything like that anymore. A lot bigger buildings and stuff these days. There's a huge building. I don't even know what's going on in Nashville. Every time I go down, there's a new skyscraper going up. Something's going on down there. So Nashville falls. And the Army of the Ohio had sat across the river for 2 days looking at it until the gunboats showed up. So Nashville is going to become the largest Union supply depot of the entire war. One of the warehouses they build there is 1/4 of a mile long, and that's only one of a dozen warehouses for supplies. Built in the area we call the Gulch to this very day. All the railroad tracks were down in the Gulch. They still run through the Gulch, but There's housing developments and all that kind of stuff. And then of course you're on the Cumberland River, so you get tons and tons of steamboat traffic. There's your other quiz winner right there, Fort Defiance on St. Cloud Hill. Who knows your French military engineering, inspired by who? Sébastien Vauban, the brilliant 18th century French military engineer who had an amazing influence on the Mahans at West Point, who taught into American military engineers. Your telltale signs, or your entrant angles for crisscrossing fields of fire. Largest limestone fort ever built in the United States. If you didn't go on the tour last year, come down and see it. It's got an interpretive center. It's where the Nashville Roundtable meets also. And then fortified bridges and things like that. So they're going to build earthworks, and they're right across from Negley, about over here is Fort Casino, Fort Houston. Those are the big ones, and there's redoubts and everything else that they're going to tie into the flanks of the river. So here's the strategic situation after the fall of Fort Henry and Donelson, the fall of Nashville. The biggest, cheapest Union land grab of the entire Civil War. They wish it would be this easy for the next 3 years. Because the defense line goes from here to, holy cow, we're down here in the deep south. 3/4 of Tennessee has been overrun. You've still got this part. You've still got Memphis until June. That falls in June. They've overrun the state. The Tennesseans are like, wait a minute, we just joined this party about 8 months ago. What up? We just lost our state capital. Huge morale blow. Huge morale blow. Sidney Johnson's looking like an idiot. All the newspapers are writing, this guy's the greatest general ever. You know, he was the #2 ranking Confederate general, not Lee. Lee was 3rd after Samuel Cooper when they issued the rank of full general. So he was the esteemed guy. Now the newspaper's like, what is wrong with this guy? How could he miss this? It's a colossal blunder. So he is going to start to react to this. As I said, the morale falls. This will set in motion the Confederate military strategy for the rest of the war, seizing back the initiative from the Federals. And if they could take the capital, they figure most of the rest of Tennessee will be theirs. Well, it just worked for the Federals. They took the capital and got the vote in the state of Tennessee. And about 5 times will they try to make this happen from this point on to the end of the war. This strategy is like taking your football playbook, walking across the gridiron at the start of the game, handing it to the opposing coach, going, here's what I'm doing for the next 4 quarters, let's see how it goes. By the time the clock runs out. So as I said, I'm a University of Georgia fan. Our former coach now, Mark Green, the other guy is Satan. We hate anything Florida. I could go to Knoxville, home of UT, wearing Georgia regalia, and I've done this. Get junk about being a Bulldogs fan. I just look up and go, God, the Gators suck. By mistake. We can all agree how we hate the Gators, and we hated it even more when Spurrier was the coach. He's gone. They're both gone now, so I got to wait till Kirby Smart meets somebody from Florida, get a picture, replace it. But it's the same thing. The Federals just have to hang on to Nashville. Nothing else matters. They know what the Confederates are going to do for the next 3 years. How easy is that when you know what your enemy is going to do? It makes it real easy. Empire Strikes Back, attempt number 1. Thank you, George Lucas, for the film project. Shiloh, 1862. They will mass all the forces that have fallen back from Columbus, the Army of Central Kentucky, what got out of Fort Donelson, about 1,000 guys, some troops around in here, all fall back and start to coalesce at Corinth. And they get massively reinforced. Bragg's army coming up from Pensacola, Mobile, Ruggles from New Orleans, other Van Dorn and Price are on their way over. They stop and fight a battle at Pea Ridge, lose, and they'll show up after the Shiloh campaign's over. But then, this will create a new army, the Army of the Mississippi, created out of 4 Confederate forces that had previously existed. Sidney Johnson's the commander. January 62, Beauregard shows up, and he'll be sort of the second in command, and they're going to march on Grant, who is coming up the Tennessee River. Tennessee River flows north, so you're going upstream when you're heading south. Same with the Cumberland River, and land at Pittsburgh Landing, not entrenched, nor does he send his cavalry out to find out what's in those woods down towards the Mississippi state line. Surprise! April 6th, a whole bunch of Confederates are in those woods, and they're coming with an attitude. Big attitude. They will smash into his lines and start to drive him back. Beauregard writes the tactical plan, which is shove Grant away from the river into the Owl Creek area, into the swamps, and destroy the army. Brilliant plan. So it's going to be a left wheel movement. If that's the case, where does the preponderance of your combat power go? The right flank, your right flank. Where is the preponderance of the Confederate combat power? In the center and on the left. They've got 2 brigades over here. That's why it doesn't happen. When Sidney Johnson gets mortally wounded, shot by his own guy, He thinks his maps are about 1.5 miles off scale too. He thinks when he starts his turning movement, he says we are checkmating them now after they've overrun the camps down here and have shoved them back. He thinks where they're supposed to be, they're 1.5 miles short of where they're supposed to be to start the turning movement. They fail. Sidney Johnson dies. Beauregard takes over, falls back 1 mile or so, regroup his forces. Forrest goes on a recon. Buell's Army of the Ohio is crossing the river in Great Spring. Comes back and says they're crossing the river in Great Spring. We're really in trouble tomorrow morning. And then the next day on the 7th, Grant will start a counterattack and slowly drive the Confederates off the field. If the Confederates win in Shiloh, they're crossing the river and marching on Nashville. That's the goal. That was the whole point of this. Destroy Grant, go east, northeast actually. So attempt number 1 doesn't quite work. So the defeated Confederates are going to fall back to Corinth. And in June of '62, there'll be some fighting around Corinth in May. Several battles up in the Tennessee side, on the Mississippi side, Farmington, a couple other places. And then because of the horrible water supply conditions, a lot of disease, they will fall back down the road to Tupelo. Then what will happen is Grant is in Halleck's doghouse. Halleck doesn't like Grant very much anyway. But after being surprised in Shiloh, he's really in the doghouse. He's temporarily replaced by George Thomas. And then Pope comes down, John Pope, from his brilliant Island No. 10 campaign going on at the same time, marches down with the Army of the Mississippi. Buell's there with the Army of the Ohio, minus Negley's division here, division under Morgan at Cumberland Gap, and then the big division under Ormsby Mitchell down at Fayetteville. So he's got the biggest of the armies. So he's got 125,000 Federals moving on Corinth, Mississippi. It takes about 20-some days to move what you can drive in 30 minutes. But if you've been there, it's swamp. Corduroy the roads, and Halleck is not going to let himself be surprised. He read books about the Roman legions. At the end of the day in enemy country, they lagered their positions. That's why Grant gets temporarily fired. Then when they get there and they force Beauregard out of Corinth and Beauregard leaves, this massive army breaks up. Sherman goes to Memphis, start forces heading towards Chattanooga. Buell goes back here. He's going to resupply and start an offensive down the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad, which Forrest will spoil on his birthday at Murfreesboro, July of '62, and stop him cold. But the big one is Ormsby Mitchell's division coming down and capturing northern Alabama and threatening Chattanooga. Confederates are trying to figure out what are they going to do, because they've got about 1,000 guys holding Chattanooga, so they're not going to be able to stop him if he concentrates on it. So the new commander is, if you're of the Chattanooga Roundtable, this is your cue to start booing. Wait for it. Braxton Bragg, there you go. I didn't get up or up out of that guy. Braxton Bragg takes command, and he's going to reorganize the army. Larry Hewitt wrote a brilliant essay that has been reprinted in volume 1 of his Confederate Generals of the Western Theater book. Read it. It changed my mind on Bragg as a strategist. Not the tactician. He couldn't win a battle if his life depended on it. His life did, he couldn't win a battle. Inflexible. Strategically, brilliant guy. And here's where this starts. I owe Larry a lot for teaching me this. So they're at Tupelo. They're passing the hat, trying to figure out where Elvis is going to be born. I don't know who's in the pool. It must have been huge, even if the guys were putting in 50 cents. Where's Elvis going to be? Where he's born Tupelo. So Bragg is going to send troops to East Tennessee because the new department commander over there is Edmund Kirby Smith. And because of the Army of the Ohio putting pressure on Chattanooga, hey man, getting a lot of pressure. I've only got about 5,000 guys here. Can you send me anybody? And Bragg has now got part of the Army in the West with him, the division under John McCown, his works division commander. He goes, yeah, I'll send you McCown and 3,000 guys. So he's being a good guy. He's helping his neighbor out to try to secure this area. And then here comes the next phone call. Oh man, I need some more help. Can you send me? Okay, I'll send you Preston Smith and Patrick Claiborne's brigades. That's all I can afford because I got all these Federals hanging out north of me. And then they start to break up and that relieves them. So what Bragg is going to start to do is hold on to Mississippi, which will lead to attempt number 2. Because now you've got Price and Van Dorn that have come over, and what he is going to do is make sure that Price and Van Dorn are holding northern Mississippi with the plan to move into western Tennessee and tie down Grant. Now, a lot of people think the Kentucky campaign is Bragg's idea. It is Edmund Kirby Smith's idea. He drags Bragg along. And it's actually a really good idea. This is Napoleon. This is Frederick the Great type maneuver stuff. This is a very, very interesting campaign. Largest strategic rail movement of the entire Civil War is the Army of the Mississippi going to Mobile, crossing the bay, trains all the way up to here, to Chattanooga, and we'll start marching. Smith leaves Knoxville a few weeks earlier, and he's already up into Kentucky, and he's won the Battle of Richmond on August 30th in annihilation of the Union Army there, and then is threatening Frankfort. His cavalry vedettes are looking down, oh wow, there's Cincinnati. And that's when they're building the forts. If you've been south, there's Fort Wright, Fort Mitchell, Fort Thomas, and it's all, they're grabbing everybody that can hold a shovel, well, get the across the river, dig ditches, because he's actually threatening Cincinnati. And then Bragg finally gets up there, and his plan is, because Buell's here, is to get to Munfordville on the Green River. How many of you have been to Munfordville, Kentucky? Exit 65, I-65. Have you seen the Green River? It's a big, deep ditch. You take out the railroad bridge, the road bridge, you get your guys across, Buell is cut off from his supply line in Louisville. It works. So by the rules of war, thou shalt fall back and take your supply line back. Buell goes, nope, I will withdraw from Nashville, I'll leave Negley here, march to the west of Munfordville, and beat feet to Louisville. And I'll pick up about 20,000 more troops up there. And then, as the Confederates begin to coalesce in central Kentucky in the Bluegrass region, I will march myself forward and threaten them with battle. And he heavily outnumbers them. So that's the plans. But they still bagged 4,000 Federals at Munfordville, including a guy named John Wilder, Pre-Lightning Brigade. And he's exchanged. Here's the problem that Hewitt points out. Bragg outranks Smith, but they are both department commanders. So Bragg and Hewitt cites this. They're sending each other communications. Do you have orders that I am your superior or you are my superior? If so, copy me with those orders and I will obey you. That's what they're sending to each other. Can you see the problem developing here? Those orders don't exist. Why? Jeff Davis forgot to appoint an overall commander. Because you've got another column under Humphrey Marshall coming out of Tullahoma, Virginia at the same time. So you've got Price and Van Dorn, who do work for Bragg. There they are right there, Price and Van Dorn. One of my former cats was named for Earl Van Dorn for the same reason Earl Van Dorn got killed. He was hanging out with all the female cats in our neighborhood, and got fixed. That's why he got his name. These two guys are, competing department commanders. They're nominally cooperating, but they don't have to obey each other's orders, nor do they have to cooperate if they don't want to. So Price and Van Dorn are going to get tied up around Iuka and Corinth. Still tied out some of Grant, but Grant will get away some divisions to go up and help. So the campaign is now going to fall apart as it develops. Here's the map showing the isolation of Munfordville. There's Kirby Smith already in Lexington, and in the bluegrass part. So despite the tactical victory at Perryville, where Confederates are outnumbered 2-1, and they shoved Buell back about 2 miles, they've now, by the way, found some actual locations of some buildings that were accurately portrayed on maps. That the maps have now been accurately updated, and they're buying some more land up there. So it's a wonderful battlefield if you've never been. Kirby Smith never comes to help out Bragg. So he's outnumbered 2.5 to 1 at Perryville, and he's got to fall back. The other thing is, there's a drought. So the crops aren't growing, so you're not living off the land. You're not getting your water. In fact, Perryville starts nominally because of guys trying to find water at Proctor's Creek. You're not getting thousands upon thousands of Kentuckians that are going to show and flock to the colors. So you have supply issues, you're outnumbered, Smith and Bragg aren't cooperating. Bragg has his council of war, should we fall back? All the officers say, yes, we should fall back. And they do. And they're going to fall back to Murfreesboro, which is being held by a small force under John C. Breckinridge, who had just lost the Battle of Baton Rouge in Louisiana in August of 1862, and is being brought up to reinforce the campaign, and that's as far as he gets is Murfreesboro. So let's look at the problems. So this is attempt number 2. Again, the Federals hang on to Nashville by leaving a division there, but the move is to get everybody out of Tennessee and to make a quick run and grab Nashville. That's what Breckinridge would have done if Nashville had evacuated. They forced withdrawal of federal troops from northern Alabama and most of middle Tennessee. That's a good thing. Hold them completely out, except for where? Star of our show, Nashville. They're still holding it. Bragg, a gifted strategist, leaves. Look what he does. He leaves troops to hold Mississippi. He sends troops to help East Tennessee, and then uses maneuver warfare. Fabulous. Captures 4,000 Federals at Munfordville. Smith destroys 9,000 troops at Richmond, Kentucky. Fabulous. This is all looking pretty good. Whoops. Some failures, lack of food and water, they can't stay. They were expecting 20,000 recruits, they get 4,000 to 5,000. Why is that? The biggest political mistake. If you're going to go into Kentucky to get the Kentuckians to jump off the fence into your camp, who should you be bringing? The most prominent Kentuckian in the Confederate military, John Breckinridge, former Vice President of the United States, and the Orphan Brigade. Here we are, guys, come flock to our colors. Where are they? Baton Rouge. What are they doing down there? Fighting with the Arkansas, getting beaten in the battle. And then Smith and Bragg, who was particularly Smith, fails to cooperate with Bragg. So the campaign is not going to work the way it should. But they're far more successful, as Hewitt correctly points out, than what Robert E. Lee was doing in Maryland at this time, where he fails the test of Wellington. There's the good Iron Duke in the center. God, does he look like a general or what? That guy is a general. What's the Wellington test? To know when to retreat and to dare to do it. Bragg knew when to retreat. Lee risked his army along the banks of the river at Antietam. Almost got destroyed. Whose fault is it? The buck stops there. Before Harry Truman. He failed to appoint the overall commander to issue the orders. That's exactly what he needed to do. Had Sidney Johnston been alive, that would have been Sidney Johnston doing it. But when Johnston dies, he does not. He breaks up Department Number 2 into 3 different departments. That's where your problem's going to start coming in. It is what Richard McMurray calls localitis, inflammation of the local. So they fall back, and they will plan the next move, which is going to lead to attempt number 3, the Battle of Stones River. So they coalesce around Murfreesboro. Kirby Smith's army becomes the 3rd Corps and is absorbed into the newly named Army of Tennessee. And then a new commander of what had been the Army of the Ohio, William Stark Rosecrans, who's a fine Union general, has a bad day at Chickamauga, but he's a fine general, is commanding the 14th Corps left, center, and right wing. It will not become the Army of the Cumberland until January 1863. That is who's going to be advancing on him. So it's going to be who pulls the trigger first. Bragg moving on Nashville and trying to assault it or force Rosecrans into a battle, or sitting in his position and letting Rosecrans march on him. And that's exactly what's going to happen. The plan being, I will beat Rosecrans, I will bend him back into the valley of the Stones River, destroy him, I have the road and the railroad, and Nashville is mine for the taking. Never mind that there's still a division of troops up there with some heavy guns, etc. But there's 28 miles down the road. Jefferson Davis intervenes a couple weeks prior to the Battle of Stones River and takes the 9,000-man division of Carter Stevenson and transfers it to Vicksburg, because things are starting to heat up now in Mississippi. Now, Larry Daniels' book on the Army of Cumberland has an appendix that argues that it would have made no difference. I completely disagree with him. 9,000 more men at Stones River would have made a lot of difference. And then, once you smash this army, you get them on the railroad and send them down. So they have a barely equal sort of army, but minus those 9,000 men, they don't have the fresh troops needed after the end of the day when Rosecrans is bent back on the river to stick that final nail in the coffin and pull off a victory. They take a day off, and on January 2nd, 1863, resume the attack with Breckinridge charging across Stones River up against the ridge with Mendenhall's battery of 52 pieces of artillery lined hub to hub. And he gets to watch the orphans slaughtered. My poor orphans, he will exclaim. Bragg will fall back. So attempt number 3 doesn't work. So Bragg falls back to Tullahoma for the next 6 months. Tullahoma is a Greek word according to a Confederate officer. Tulla meaning mud, homa meaning more mud. Because in the 12-day campaign, it rains 10 and a half of those days. And when you get down to this part of Middleton, excuse me, even up to Nashville, even up where I live for that matter, and up on the Highland Rim, we have very clay soil. And when it gets saturated, it's goopy. God, I hate digging in my yard when it's wet. And it's worse down here, where you have limestone outcroppings in your yard. If you've been to the Bedford Forest Birth Home in Chapel Hill, Tennessee, the limestone is, you can just walk in, a little bit of grass, a whole bunch of limestone. The number 1 crop of Middle Tennessee is rock. Nashville is Rock City, that's it. But they're up on the rim, so this is the basin, the Nashville basin. That's why Forrest's family moves to Mississippi. We can't grow anything here. It's cattle area, but that's about it, and very poor soil. So Bragg is hunkered down between Shelbyville and Tullahoma, and with his flanks out towards Manchester, and then he's got Morgan up in the mountains up here doing something Morgan absolutely hates doing, being a cadet. And he'll ride off on his stupid raid to Ohio and Indiana, and get captured and his division destroyed. So Rosecrans is going to pull a Frederick the Great Napoleon move, and he's going to feint one way, maneuver the other way, and at the cost of about 1,100 men, drive Bragg out of Middle Tennessee to Chattanooga. Rests up about 3 weeks, builds up his supplies, rebuilds bridges and railroads, and does it again to take Chattanooga. Feints this way, maneuvers that way, blows Bragg out of Chattanooga without firing a shot. Rosie's going, hey, 2 for 3. Sweet, let's try this again. Well, Bragg falls back into North Georgia. Now, the terrain is completely different because you're in the foothills of the Appalachians. So those corps are like way down here, way up here, and way up here, and they're not mutually supporting like they were before. But he's going to try it, feint one way, maneuver the other way. This time, Bragg's the quarterback, takes the snap, steps back in the pocket, and stays there. Gets 2 divisions of troops from the Army of Northern Virginia, gets a brigade from Charlotte, gets some troops coming over from Mississippi, and one of the few battles of the war where the Confederates outnumber the Federal Army, we get the 3-day Battle of Chickamauga, and it is a 3-day battle. Everything that happens on the 18th sets up the 19th and 20th. Without the 18th, there is no 19th and 20th. It is a 3-day battle. Dave Powell will tell you that. And he wins the battle, not by the plan that he wants. Again, Bragg's tactical intransigence. The plan being, as I'm going to smash Rosecrans, shove him down here to the Macklemore's Cove, and because he can't get over the mountains, I will smash his army. And then march on to Chattanooga, march back over Swanee Mountain, and head on the highways up to Nashville. That's what's supposed to happen here. They break through the center, and instead of going this way, they turn that way. Of course, the bulk of Rosie's army's already moved up this way anyway, so he would maybe had about a division to smash had they gone the right way. So they move on to Chattanooga. Rosie has a bad day and falls back in, and then surrenders the initiative to Braxton Bragg, who takes the high ground and tries to cut off the supply lines. When you're laying siege, you're not maneuvering. So in some respects, you are going to surrender the initiative to lay the siege. So Bragg tries to do something and start a new front in East Tennessee. When Longstreet comes west for Chickamauga, he comes down through the Carolinas into Georgia, and then up from Atlanta to Chattanooga, or towards Chattanooga, Catoosa Station, actually south of Ringgold. Why doesn't he take the short railroad that runs from Virginia down the valley, right through Abingdon, and right to Knoxville? Because the first part of September, Ambrose Burnside has moved down and captured Knoxville, cut the railroad. So they want to get Knoxville back. So he starts sending some of his Army of Tennessee guys up there, and then when Longstreet falls into the anti-Bragg cabal and all the officer infighting that is the history of the Army of Tennessee, he pulls those guys back and sends Little Pete up there with his 2 divisions plus a couple brigades that he never gets back, by the way. I'll loan you these brigades, and they never show up. So what we get, Grant shows up, the Army of the Tennessee just won at Vicksburg to break the siege. Rosecrans gets fired. Thomas gets the Army of the Cumberland. Sherman is the fair-haired boy, and they, at the Battle of O'Shea Ridge on November 2017, will shatter the Army of Tennessee, their center anyway, and it's the Cumberlanders that do it. The 4 divisions that march up the center and break the line, while Claiborne's division is kicking Bill Sherman in the teeth. As I keep telling Jim Ogden, it is not the Sherman Reservation, it is the Claiborne Reservation. This is where Sherman got smashed. You know it. So Bragg resigns the Army of Tennessee command in December of '63. So who arrives in late December? Joe Johnson, coming from the Department of Alabama and Mississippi. Not a favorite of Jeff Davis. This map came out of a Civil War Times article a few years ago, and it shows you what Jeff Davis wants. Jeff Davis wants an offensive. He wants back into Tennessee with the goal of getting Nashville and doing what else they can do. So he tells Joe Johnson, I will help you rebuild your army and give you reinforcements if you go on the offensive. And hey, look at these ideas. We will go up here to Maryville outside Knoxville. Old Pete's running around up here as he spends the winter. He doesn't get back to Virginia until late March, '64. So he's still hanging around. We'll hold up with him. We'll march across the Cumberland Plateau to Nashville. How many of you have driven on I-40 between Knoxville and Nashville? When you get up on the Cumberland Plateau, there's rock. There's no railroad, and there's certainly no I-40. There's not even any stakes for I-40. They're not even thinking I-40. The railroad that you see now is a post-war railroad. You're not going to supply your army marching over those crummy roads, such as they are. That's a really stupid plan. Part 2 is, if you move everybody away from Dalton, if Sherman is sitting here, he goes, wow, boing, right to Atlanta. Far better would have been do what Hood does and move over this way and come up Nashville that way, because you could draw supplies out of Alabama, at least. But even still, you're uncovering Atlanta, the industrial might of the Confederacy, and the 4 railroads, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not going to work. And Davis is getting reports from Johnson. We lost 50 plus artillery pieces of missionary Ripley. Old Pete came to us with no wagons. I had to give him a couple thousand wagons to go to Knoxville. So we have a few wagons. A lot of deserters. I'm doing what I can to get them back. Johnson rebuilds the Army of Tennessee. He was a Quartermaster General of the U.S. Army prior to the war. He understands logistics. And this Army, by the time the Atlanta campaign kicks off in May of '64, is the best fed, best equipped, largest Confederate Army of the West. It will eventually grow to some 85,000 troops, not all at one time, but that's how big it's going to be by the time the campaign is going through. He's 54.5 at the start. He gets about 25,000 reinforcements immediately, and then it goes from there. So Davis sends an inspector down there, because again, he doesn't like Joe Johnson. He goes, he's sending me all this stuff and he can't do anything. Will you inspect the Army of Tennessee and report back? And he reports back and says, they're missing 52 pieces of artillery, they're missing all these wagons. Mr. President, he's telling you the truth. The Army cannot go on the offensive. So for the Atlanta campaign, the next 4 months, it's basically going to be, we have to backpedal, try to beat Sherman somewhere in North Georgia, maybe draw him in deep, further along his supply line, smash him, and give him one heck of a retreat back to Chattanooga, assume the offensive, march back over the mountains, and on to Nashville we go. Johnson is fired in mid-July 1864 because he's given up way too much land, particularly here at Kennesaw, and fallen back behind the river lines, where he's now in the environs of Atlanta itself, and John Bell Hood takes over, and then Atlanta falls on September 2nd after the Battle of Jonesboro, cuts the last rail line into the city, and on the 3rd, Sherman sends that amazing email to Lincoln that electrifies the North. Atlanta is ours and fairly won. Newspaper headlines all over the place. Lincoln reaches into his desk and goes, that letter I wrote a couple weeks ago about I'm not going to make it again in November, I think we ripped that thing up. And then he gets Cedar Creek and 3rd Winchester, Mobile, just prior to that. So you get this trifecta of big victories, and Lincoln knows he's got it come November. Because that's what the Confederates are playing on. Make it painful. As Lee says, resist manfully. And what's he doing in Virginia? Grant loses 60,000+ guys in 1 month. Boy, how's that going over the home front? Can you imagine if Joe Johnson fought the Atlanta campaign like that? Woo! Lincoln's probably out of a job come November. So Hood's going to take over. Jeff Davis comes back to the Army of Tennessee for a second time, who've now moved over to Palmetto, southwest of Atlanta, to give a rousing speech, to stir morale, to reassure the home front that we're going to keep on fighting. We have an army, we have an aggressive commander in the army, and oh, by the way, we will carry our banners back to Tennessee. And the newspaper reporters are, President Davis said today in a speech that he will carry the banners of the Army of Tennessee back to Tennessee. Who read newspapers? Him. Lots of them. Good source of intel, especially when you have an idiot commander-in-chief running off of the mountain. Hey, Hitler? Yeah, Normandy. Yeah, June 6th. We'll be there. Okay, fine. That was FDR's phone call to Hitler that never happened. Same thing. That's what you don't do. Now, I know this roundtable's had just the most amazing historians throughout its history, but I'm going to claim one thing that not one of them have ever found. Jeff Davis's Facebook page. Found it. Here it is. So Davis logs on that night to spread the news. He goes on a date with Jeffy D because he's got to get with the kids. Get the kids going. Told the boys we was going back to Tennessee. Hood is the man, am I right? Booyah! My wife's 7th graders do booyah. I didn't know they were doing that 150 years ago. Sherman sees it. Yeah. Sherman likes this. Billy, come. Bring it. Tom's going to kick butt. Does he care? No. He doesn't. So what's Hood's campaign going to start out being? It will culminate in attempt number 5. The Atlanta campaign in reverse. Back up the Western Atlantic Railroad. The plan is we cut off his supply line. He must abandon Atlanta. What they don't know is that every bloody little town Hood has, or Sherman has captured has 30 days of supplies in it. Just to prevent that from happening, in case that Forrest guy showed up. 30 days minimum supply. He's got even more, and it's sitting in Atlanta. He's got tons of supplies. Now, Hood's going to capture some of them. He'll fail at Allatoona Pass, which is somewhere around, let's see, between, yeah, right there. He'll fail at Allatoona Pass, and there's massive warehouses at Allatoona, which they wanted to get with French's division. while he's maneuvering to the west, and he's picking off railroad here, railroad here, railroad here. He'll bag the town of Dalton and cause the surrender of the 44th United States Colored Troops up there. And then Sherman chases him up there, and then moves over into northern Alabama. And Sherman says, bye-bye, I'm going to the beach. And he says, supposedly, if he will go to the Ohio River, I will give him the rations. He doesn't care. Because what the Confederates fail to understand is Sherman is planning on cutting himself off of his supply line and marching and living off the land. And moving through the upper part of the most fertile state of the Confederacy. Now, when you go to the Shenandoah Valley next week, they're going to give all this malarkey about being the breadbasket of the Confederacy. Georgia, baby. It's the spring of 1863 on, Lee got most of his food from Georgia. And he says in 1864, without Georgia, Virginia cannot hold. That's why Braxton Bragg's food's coming from Alabama, Mississippi, and he's defending Georgia in 1863. His commissary guy is Alabama, needs some food, forget it, Army of Virginia's getting all this. Largest state in Mississippi, huge, huge food supplier. So the campaign moves on from there, and what Hood is going to do now, move into northern Alabama and start to disobey his superior officer Beauregard at every turn. New program I heard recently from Stephen Davis, who wrote the book, What the Yankees Did to Us About the Siege of Atlanta, etc., has gone through the official records and shown that at every turn, Beauregard, who's Hood's superior, he disobeys Beauregard's orders at every turn. Tries to assault Decatur, Alabama, moves over here to Tuscumbia, and will sit there for 3 weeks because the river's high, and he's waiting for force to show up from his West Tennessee raid up at Johnsonville, which is right there, where he smashes $6 million worth of Union supplies, thinking that's going to force Sherman back from Georgia. And again, Sherman has cut himself off from this, and he doesn't care. Sherman sends Stanley and Schofield, 4th and 23rd Corps respectively, back to Nashville, and gives George Thomas carte blanche to pull in anything wearing blue and put them in Nashville. A.J. Smith's Corps, left wing of the 17th Corps, will be showing up. All kinds of garrisons from around here. All the garrisons from here are going to be pulled back in. The other coalescing point is Fortress Rosecrans at Murfreesboro, and they will just abandon the towns. And he sends Schofield and Stanley out to basically be the speed bump to buy time. This is the affair at Spring Hill. Jamie Gillum, who's a friend of mine, is a Marine Gunny Sergeant, former Marine Gunny Sergeant, wrote the best book ever on Spring Hill. Nobody is, he knows more about Spring Hill than any human being on this planet. His book went from this thick to that thick, and he just found tons of stuff on what happened at Spring Hill. November 30th, of course, the tragedy of the Army of Tennessee, the Battle of Franklin, where the heart and soul of that army is shot out, where Schofield pulls off a nice defense of the city. 6 Confederate generals killed and mortally wounded, 52 regimental commanders killed and mortally wounded, captured. The heart and soul, 8,000 casualties of the Army of Tennessee dies for his foot hors de combat on that tragic, tragic day. They're doing amazing stuff reclaiming the battlefield, so if you haven't been down there in a while, come back, because you'll be seeing a lot less buildings than you used to see. It costs them a lot of money what they're doing. So Schofield will pull back to Nashville that night. Hood will move to lay siege to Nashville, and I know it's been proven completely that he didn't use laudanum, but I'm convinced he smoked crack. Because there's no way with that wreck of an army was he going to be able to lay siege to Nashville. Laying siege means you are surrounding the army or using topography to surround the army to starve them out. He can't tie in his flanks between the bends of the Cumberland River. He can't touch the railroad flooding from Louisville. He can't interdict the steamboats until he gets a small artillery battery up on the bluffs near where Fort Zollicoffer was, with his horse cavalry up there. That's no siege, that's a joke. And he's going to sit there with 25,000 men. As Thomas sucks in all these garrison troops, and A.J. Smith's 10,000 guys show up on December 1st. His garrison will rise to 65,000 troops. Starting on the 7th and 8th of December, I'm not going to show you this because you want to order this from Tennessee Historical Reporter. This is the current issue. Oops, that's an important note in there. This is the current issue, and it's got an article written by a friend of mine, Phil Kemmerly, a retired professor of geology from our local university, Austin Peay State University, whose sports battle cry is, "Go P!" True? Spelled P-E-A-Y, by the way. It's pronounced P. He's an old Tennessee governor. In fact, Austin Peay V lives in our town. And he talks about the relationship between this freezing weather, where it gets to 23 below zero with the wind chill, the limestone, the clay soils that have been saturated with rain, snow, sleet, and ice, and how the Confederates are trying to dig entrenchments in that muck. The entrenchments on Shies Hill are 2 feet deep. You need minimum of 4 feet and throw up 2 feet or more of dirt from the trench to build a parapet to stand behind. And he talks about it's the most amazing article. I told him, you are hereby ordered to do a roundtable program because this is new cutting edge stuff. The relationship between weather, topography, and the soils and the limestone and things like that. And that's what Hood's digging trenches in, or trying to, for 2 days. He sends Forrest with a division of infantry over to Murfreesboro to try to take that garrison. Forrest was, again, there July 62, walks up to, here's Fortress Rosecrans, 52 pieces of heavy artillery, 8,000 men. Whoa, this wasn't here 2 years ago. They built it because he was there 2 years ago. That's exactly why they built it. They didn't want him coming back. There's a battle north of there called the Battle of the Cedars, where the garrison actually sallies out and the infantry division breaks and Forrest grabs the colors, tries to rally through. So he's lost a division of cavalry and a division of infantry to deal with Murfreesboro, so he's got an even smaller army, and they're out there suffering. They can't build fires, the wood's picked clean, there is no food to eat off the land because the Federals have been there for 2.5 years, crops were hauled in a month earlier. This is a campaign that was never going to succeed, which gets me in really good with the Battle of Franklin people. I said, no, that makes your story even more tragic. You're missing the point. Logistics. So Grant, if you know the story here, Grant's urging Thomas, attack, you've got Hood right for the taking. Sir, snow, sleet, ice, men can't stand up, animals can't stand up. Tomorrow, same thing. No, attack. I don't know what Grant's smoking because he's ignoring Thomas. Finally he sends John Logan. Here's your orders. You will walk into Thomas's headquarters. If he is not attacked, hand them, relieve them of command, and attack immediately. On the 12th of December, James Wilson's cavalry moves from Edgefield through downtown Nashville to take their positions on the west side, where they're going to attack when Thomas pulls the trigger on December 15th. Wilson writes, the horses can't stand up. If you've been in Nashville, we're hilly. We're not, flat and like down around Springfield or anything like that. We're like this. That's why we get 3 inches of snow. We lose school for 5 days. Because they're down in the hollows. The buses can't get there and stuff. So that's the same thing. So finally the thaw hits on the 13th and 14th, and finally on the 15th, he sends the email, we are attacking now. And in 2 days of devastating battle, the cavalry out here enveloping the Confederate left flank, readouts 1 through 5, not finished because of the frozen soil and the high limestone, poorly sighted on topography crest as opposed to the military crest, meaning the Federals could run up the slopes and they can't get shot until they get to the top of the slopes because he won't let his engineer officers sight these batteries. They are crushed. Hood falls back just a couple miles to a second line and spends all night digging in the icy ground. Compton Hill, Shies Hill now, 2 feet. Peach Orchard Hill, Overton Hill, 2 to 3 feet, that's all they can get. Stone wall in the center, right about in here, and they just wait. They're not falling back further south to Holly Tree Gap, where the hills are really good. That's where I would want to, is Holly Tree Gap. And they just let Thomas do the same thing again. Envelopment of the cavalry, crushes the line, they collapse, the rout is on, the Army of Tennessee is rapidly falling back. They will fight at Holly Tree Gap, they will fight at a couple other places where the old railroad bridge used to be at Franklin, it's now gone. It's too bad because they had bullet holes and stone. They widened the road, and I drove through there about a year ago. Where did the bridge go? Because it had bullet holes in it. That was the Louisiana boys that fought there. And then Forrest shows up with Walpole and takes over the rear guard. He will beat James Harrison Wilson like a drum coming into Tennessee. He will beat James Harrison Wilson like a drum going out of Tennessee. And then Wilson will beat Forrest like a drum in Selma in 1865. If you're going to learn to be a cavalry commander, learn by getting beat by Forrest. He was an engineer officer, he wasn't an actual cavalry. His first cavalry fight's 3rd Winchester. You'll probably see that when you're over. So the Army of Tennessee falls back. But they got to see the spires of Nashville. They got to see the state capitol. We're here. Closest they get. A couple more miles, boys. We just got to get through 65,000 Yankees and heavy guns and all these ditches and forts and everything else, but we're here. The Army's destroyed. What's left falls back to Alabama and then breaks in 2. Would have been the Army of Mississippi goes to Mobile. The rest of the organic Army of Tennessee moves over to North Carolina, and they will surrender about 2 weeks after the vaunted Army of Northern Virginia, something I'd love to hold over my A and B friends. April 9th. 9th, we're still in the field. Bentonville, Averysboro, etc. So ever since February 62, Nashville's been luring those Confederates, come and take me. Sing, 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 no heads of, word is one and bodies of birds, just a beautiful big city to try to recapture it. And they get the latest and closest attempt is where the army is destroyed in December of 1864 as they died from frozen and saturated ground. There's some nice pictures of the Brentwood Hills. That's what the Federals call the Battle of Brentwood Hills, as a matter of fact, the second day. Our state capitol is still in use in the Gulch area. I think that's one of the houses built, if I'm not mistaken. There were some of those there to keep the boys happy. So the army is destroyed on the rocks of the Rock City, as it was called back then, emulating it for the ancient sisters of ancient Greek lore. I want to end with this. We fell on February 19th, 1862. So the story of Clarksville, the war that we try to tell in our interpretive center at Fort Defiance, is one of occupation. So how did the people deal with occupation? And I was the lead historian for that, for which I'm very grateful. And I was amazed by 1865, just the downbeat of occupation. That when the news of the Lincoln assassination hit Clarksville, the churches were filled with mourners. Guys who 3 years ago had overwhelmingly voted for secession. Northern business people had moved down, as would happen in Memphis and a lot of other places. Nashville, guys from Cincinnati, St. Louis would set up shop because you couldn't get anything unless you took the oath of allegiance. So these were business opportunities. And it was an amazing story. But we had a number of regiments occupying us during the war. The 102nd Ohio was there for a while. But our longest guest was the 83rd Illinois, out from Knox County, Galesburg, out west of Peoria. A friend of mine and I are going to work on a unit history of the 83rd because everybody writes about the big fighting regiments, the 7th Illinois, Logan's 31st Illinois, the 45th, the lead miners, who were the 39th who fought at Deep Bottom, etc. They get all the glory, they get all the ink. This was an occupation regiment, but they fight one big battle, the 3rd Battle of Dover, against Forrest and Wheeler, and a lot of guerrilla activity. And nobody wants to talk about these guys, but they're keeping the supply lines open. So my friend John Walsh, who's from downstate, that lives at Dover, and one thing I've learned from him, that if you're collecting ephemera from regiments, Confederate or Union, you collect the regiments that weren't famous, because their stuff's cheap. So if you want to buy a collection of letters from Grant's 21st Illinois, you're going to pay through the nose, because it was Grant's old regiment, or Logan's 31st, you're going to pay through the nose. Nobody cares about the 83rd, so you can pick up collections of letters for real cheap, which is what John's been doing. He got this picture about 3 years ago. Pay attention to that guy right there. Grievously wounded in a fight against guerrillas north of Fort Donelson, a place called Pine Bluff. Crawled through the Tennessee jungle for a day and a half. Made it to the river. Finally waved down a Union gunboat who picked him up and saved his life. His name's Marion Morrison. After the war, he moves to Iowa and has a son named Marion Morrison, who has a son named, wait for it, Marion Morrison. And then becomes a star football player for the University of Spoiled Children. University of Southern California. That's what we called it when we lived out there, University of Spoiled Children. And became probably the most iconic American movie star ever, the Duke. That's John Wayne's grandpa. So thank God he didn't die in that legacy, or we wouldn't have the Duke. Talking about, were you at Chickamauga? Sir Rock Hudson, horribly mangling the name of that battle. Here's the other famous resident who spent a day in Clarksville's jail for stealing money, which looked great in the resume. He became a federal marshal in Tombstone, Arizona. Virgil Earp. Wyatt was too young. There were 2 other Earps in the 83rd, and there were some other Earps in another Illinois regiment that came from that part. There are a whole mess of Earps from out that way. Is there a homestead out there or something like that? Like the Earp homestead or house or something? I just thought of the map once, but. So I couldn't, all I ever saw when I was doing the interpretive center, all you ever see are the old pictures of Virgil. So I called it the Tombstone Museum. So I'm looking for either Civil War or right after the war pictures of Virgil Earp. Because yeah, I know, that's all I ever see. We actually got this picture we think is either late wartime or within a year or 2 of the war. I said, can I get it? We're using it for this. She says, yeah, I'll email it to you. Just give us an attribution. So I said, okay. So I said, oh, by the way, he spent a day in Clarksville jail. Oh, you wouldn't do that. I said, I'll send you the Union Provost Marshal. So I scanned and emailed it to her. That's Virgil Earp. So he was a guest in our town, in our jail, and in our town, and over at Dover. But these are the regiments that don't get the ink, and I hope John and I are going to be able to straighten that. But I want to end with that tonight, because there are lots and lots and lots and lots of regiments like these guys. 13th Wisconsin, on and on and on. Thank you for your apt attention. I appreciate being here. We have time for questions. Yes, Bruce.
You talk about the military efforts and reasons to retake Nashville with the Confederacy. What is your take on the political pressure put on by Tennessee's congressional delegation of politicians motivating the Confederate military efforts to retake Nashville?
I'm glad you brought that up. Tennessee's government, with the fall of Nashville, initially moves to Memphis. When Memphis falls in June, Tennessee's government is wherever Isham Harris is, and the wagons with the state records. And he becomes a staff officer, not a military staff officer, like a staff advisor to Bragg. So the government of Tennessee is in the field. And wherever the Army of Tennessee is, so goes the government of the state of Tennessee. And then you've got the East Tennesseans who are not part of that, as shown by when Andrew Johnson's appointed military governor, because he's from East Tennessee. And his entire rule is basically Nashville and the surrounding suburbs until Union military occupation manages to spread out and circumvent all of that stuff. It's a huge pressure from the Tennessee government, because they're getting flack from their constituents, like, hey, what's going on here? It was the late state historian Walter Durham just passed away a couple years ago, and he wrote 2 books on Nashville. One's called The Occupied City, and the other one's called Reluctant Partner, and it's Nashville 61 to 65. And he talks about the Great Panic, when the word gets there. They go to church on Sunday morning, the news from Fort Donelson, this great Confederate victory. They walk out of church an hour later, or however long the pastor's gone on for. They surrendered. Wait a minute, just an hour and a half ago, it was a great victory. What do you mean they surrendered? And the panic ensues because there's no defenses. And that's when Forrest shows up, and he's tasked by Gideon Pillow to guard the warehouses. They will eventually throw the warehouses over to the people, and everybody who wants to bail bails. Before to get on the trains, it's raining, the bridges start washing out, things of that stuff. So the Tennessee state government isn't just chaos, and they get some resemblance of work back in Memphis, and then when Memphis falls, they just move around some more, and they never really find themselves in situ, maybe in Chattanooga for a little bit, but there's a lot of pressure on their congressional delegation, like, we've got to get this back out here, 6 months from the land. Then you got the desertion angle, and that's why the Tennesseans in the 64 part, when they get to the state line, they start cheering, hey, we're back home, we're going to get it back, and on and on and on, because they've been backpedaling ever since. Getting out. That help? There's not a lot written on that.
There should be.
I know, there is. There absolutely is, which shows you how much more there is to write about the Civil War, is what's the political ramifications of it. Durham goes into it some in his books, particularly the first volume, we talk about the fall of the city and the government moving, but there's not enough. So he's got nothing better to do. He comes stay at my house and for an hour from TSLA. Yes, sir.
So if Albert Sidney Johnston had fortified Nashville the way he wanted to and followed that up, would that have made a difference?
I think so, because just when you're crossing the bridge coming in from what was Edgefield into downtown, if you look at the Cumberland River, it goes through a deep gorge. A couple of forts on that where it makes the westward turn when it had good downrange field of fire, and the gunboat guns could not. The gunboat guns were overshooting Fort Donelson, and that was only 75 to 80 feet above the river. This would have been over 100 feet above the river. There is too high. Our Fort Defiance is too high. I took William Glenn Robertson there, and he just looked at it and goes, this is too high. I said, I know, it's 200 feet from the river. Should have put it down by Trice's Landing. And because when you depress your gun, gravity takes over. Even though you ram that big ball in there, it'll slowly, start to roll out. Oh, God, not again. I hate this gravity. Newton wanted to invent gravity. We hate this. That's what would have happened, especially if you depressed your barrel quickly. So your rate of fire would have been horrible compared to slightly depressed, flat lane like they had in Fort Henry, etc. And then north of Nashville, when you're driving up to the Kentucky border, is a concentric line of bridges where you're like this on I-65. Beautiful defensive terrain. I ride it all the time. Going, what was Sidney Johnston thinking? This is gorgeous. They could have held Buell here with 20,000 troops till hell broke over. Not a lot of room to maneuver because there's more mountains, a few roads. So that's the big mistake. But what the plan is to fight the Battle of Nashville at Fort Donelson. That was the plan. By the way, I just read Dr. Tim Smith. I don't know if you had him here. Yeah. His new book is on Fort Donelson. It'll be out in October. I was privileged to be one of the select reading committee. It's going to be magnificent. Buy it. I don't know, it's University of Kansas, I think it comes out in late October. I just finished it 2 weeks ago. That's the decisive battle. And then Sidney Johnson says, don't let that army get bottled up there. By all means, we need the troops out. And you got to stop to wonder if those troops, even if half that garrison got out, where they're going to go? We get shot up. Would that have helped? 5, 6, 8, 9,000 more Confederates? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. Yes, ma'am.
So what should the Confederates have done instead of all these attempts that?
Oh, the attempts are fine. I don't think I would have changed much of anything except win. Except try to win at the end of it. The attempts, I don't have any problem with the attempt, and the attempts make sense because you have to go after Grant because he's penetrated just above the Mississippi state line. When the big thing, Tim Smith's going to argue in his book, and he's absolutely correct, the fall of Fort Henry is probably 10 times more important than the fall of Fort Donelson. Because immediately, Ledyard Phelps with 3 timberclads sails down or upstream all the way to Florence, Alabama, and doesn't see a Confederate soldier the entire way. And he's sitting within inches of the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. So if Buell had been more Napoleonic or more Clausewitzian instead of the Jominian than he was, I would have been putting every blue guy in like St. Louis, I would have stripped them, thrown them on transports, get down the Tennessee River, and put 30,000 men in Florence, Alabama. And the Confederates would have taken 2 to 3 weeks minimum to react to all of that. Heck, before Donelson, Clarksville, and Nashville was going to fall anyway. Just by looking at the map. Putting 30,000 troops down here, Nashville's got to fall. Because Buell's coming down anyway. So they're going to have to, and they can't stop Buell's 60,000 troops, they just don't have the manpower. There's 20,000 plus guys in the Army Central Kentucky, that's not going to hold, unless they get those hills north of Nashville, which aren't entrenched. So nothing, I wouldn't change anything, because you're going to have to deal with Grant, because Grant is way down deep and threatening Mississippi and threatening that railroad. So that's the first guy you've got to deal with. So the only thing is difference is win. And then the biggest chance I think they might have had to do it is the Kentucky campaign, because if Davis coordinates those 4 columns and Price and Van Dorn actually move into West Tennessee as opposed to attacking Rosecrans and Iuka Corinth, and actually, because they could bypass it and threaten Memphis and force Grant to keep troops there as opposed to saying the 2 divisions to help hold Louisville while Buell moves to deal with Bragg and Smith. You defeat Buell, joining the armies up, defeat Buell, and then you march on Nashville to the north, because then you only got 1 division holding the city, Negley. You're coming down his supply line, and he's eventually got to give it up. That would have been, I think, of all the attempts, the best. And all things worked. And I've been president of the Confederacy, that's how I work. Because I can read it now. Yes, sir.
Wasn't Johnson scared? Wasn't he scared of the Union armored gunboats and getting trapped north of the Cumberland?
Very good. I'm glad you brought that. Yes, he was.
North of the Tennessee?
Yes, on the Cumberland particularly, because that was his route of retreat, was coming through Nashville, getting across the Cumberland River. The orders go to the Donelson garrison, A, save the garrison, but B, hold long enough so I get my army from Bowling Green across the Cumberland River, because if the gunboats get there, I can't get across the river. You would have had to move east. Deepwater Navigable at least to Hartsville, maybe a little bit above there. Small boat Navigable all the way up to Somerset, Kentucky, because there were a couple steamboats up there during the Battle of Mill Springs, but much smaller steamboats. The gunboats couldn't have gotten up there, but he would have had to move way east before he could ford the Cumberland River. I mean, way east. He would have been all the way around Carthage or something like that to get across the river, which means he's moving, 75, 80 miles east before he can turn and go south again, moving away from the main theater of operations. And then he's going to have to cut his way back to get to where the main railroad line in the city of Nashville is. So yes, and the thing that comes out of Fort Henry is the ironclads are invincible. We can't stop them, and that's got the morale of Fort Donelson plummeting. And then when they advance on Fort Donelson and those guns being higher up, just pummels the tar out of them. Hey, wait a minute. They're not invincible. And they weren't invincible. They only had 2.5 inches of iron on the front. If you see the Cairo at Vicksburg, that's not what they look like at Henry and Donelson, the city class gunboat. That is a post-Battle of Memphis refit, all right, based on what they've learned from them being in action. There was armor midships where the waist guns were. There was no armor between the midships armor and the bow armor. There was no armor in the stern. There was no armor below like this until after the Battle of Memphis. And the pilot houses were vertical armored pillboxes, not the slope pillbox you see now. That's because of what happened to Foote at Donelson. A shot penetrated the pilot house, and he got a bad wound out of it, and wounded the pilot and everything else, because it was a vertical side. That was the problem with CSS Arkansas, vertical sides, not sloped, or you could get a bounce off. So they refitted them. If you look where the torpedo hit the Cairo, it's just before that armor belt that like literally just before the armor belt. They probably would have sunk it anyway, but that's what that armor is there for, because at Donelson, 2 gunboats were penetrated in the hull by skipping cannonballs from the 32-pounder. The Louisville and Pittsburgh boat. Yes?
Once, when Hood took over, at that point, when Atlanta was already gone and Hood was only appointed because Johnston wasn't aggressive, what the hell else was there for him to do? Even after Franklin, what else was there?
Well, let's backtrack up. What is there for him to do? The arguments are he had no other choice. I disagree. I think he could have hung around North Alabama, North Georgia, threatened Chattanooga, threatened Nashville, threatened a lot of other places, and most importantly, protecting the deep South industrial agricultural belt of the Confederacy. Atlanta, Selma, Macon, Augusta, Columbus. When his army moves into Tennessee, you've got 2 armies that have butted heads for 4.5 months. And then the only time I can think of in military history, bye-bye. They're going away from each other.
But it doesn't do him any good really to chase Sherman.
Well, they don't. Well,
Who's just hanging around?
but if you're hanging, yeah, but you can still be supplied. So you don't have a supply issue, especially around the railroad out of Columbus area. Not a problem. And you can chase Sherman to the point of threatening his rear, because you can pick off, when you pick off straggling units, hitting an army in a column of march is at its most vulnerable. And if you catch them aggressively, and he's only got 1 division of cavalry that he takes with him, and if you catch them aggressively, and Hood, God knows, was aggressive, falling on certain columns, and he has 3 divergent columns that are not mutually supporting positions because they're on 3 roads. So they can do what Napoleon would do, is live off the land, and not like the first corps eats everything in sight, and the corps following like, darn those guys, there's no food here. So that's why you have divergent columns to supply yourselves off the road. If you read Rice Bull's book, Soldiering, in the 124th New York or 125th, one of those 2. He talks about he's from the agricultural part of New York. He said, I've never seen corn like this. There's corn everywhere, as far as, so that's what they're doing, is eating hogs, corn. They're living high on the hogs. So, but they still have to have divergent columns or they eat everything in sight. So you could fall on one column or a central column or the right column and hopefully pick up something there. Because what's defending Georgia to Savannah? The Georgia militia and the wreck of Wheeler's cavalry coming back from Tennessee, where he destroyed it, that stupid raid that accomplished nothing. Except get his best division, Commander John Kelly, killed outside Nashville. That's who's defending Georgia until you get to Hardee and Savannah with about 5,000 troops. That's it. So he's uncovered, and then what's to stop Sherman from going? His biggest mistake is, I would have gone right to Augusta, Georgia, and taken out the powder mill. The war's over in 30 days. And he doesn't. He blows that one. That war's done. If he hits Augusta around, he leaves Atlanta the 16th of November, if he gets to Augusta about the 20th, 22nd, the war's done by January. Nothing else, Confederates can't go bang anymore. 90% of their power came out of that giant complex. And he does not, by the time he gets to Savannah, I'll get you in a second, by the time he gets to Savannah, Howell Cobb is running around Georgia going, he didn't hurt us. I've seen the newspaper accounts. He didn't hurt us. He took out no industrial cities. He skirted the upper agricultural belt of the state, barely hurt the food. If you were in that 65-mile swath, yeah, pretty bad. Losing your house, nothing but chimneys, all that kind of stuff, losing your crops, losing your hogs and everything else. But south of there, all the way to the Florida state line, that's agriculture, Georgia. And then he didn't hit Columbus, Augusta, Macon, or Savannah's gone, or the Alabama cities, particularly Selma. So you still had, who takes that out? James Wilson in the Blitzkrieg of 65. That's who smashes Georgia. Much, much more than Bill Sherman was. Yes? Oh, I think so.
When Joseph Johnson was defending Atlanta, why didn't he just retreat to the Chutes like Sherman's man?
He did.
But I'm told that he was like a group of them.
No, yeah, because he was flanked again. Because Sherman came up and looked at him and goes, no, not going to do it. So he's sending his cavalry north and south. Stoneman one way, Kilpatrick another way, find ways across the river. Another thing Sherman's got, Sherman was in Georgia in the 1840s as a young officer. He carried the 1860 census with him, so he knew where all the industrial places were and where all the food was grown. He had all of this information, avid reader of newspapers. And so he's got his cavalrymen out fighting the fords. So he will send Ken Gerard up to Roswell to try to grab the bridge there. The Confederates burn it. They will still cross at Soap, they'll wait across at Soap Creek and a couple other Powers Ferry and Paces Ferry. They'll just miss the pontoon bridge. And there are one or two other ferries, Cochrane's Island. James Brownlow, son of William Parson Brownlow, is the commander of the 1st Tennessee Cavalry U.S. Take off all their clothes with nothing but their Spencer carbines and their carbine boxes and their hats. They wade naked in the Chattahoochee River, and the Georgia militia in the opposite bank goes, "Look at them boys!" And they buck naked, and then they're ducking underwater and loading their weapons, popping out, draining the water, bang, and then walk forward a few feet, duck back down underwater, reload, walk forward, and that's how they cross the river. The Georgia militia's like, "Wow, we can't do that." Then they get across, and then they retreat to a bunch of rose bushes and thorns, which naked men dare not go. But they still get across the river. And so you've turned, particularly to the north, you've turned the river line to the north. Because Johnston goofed on what Shoup wanted to do. He wanted one corps on the northwest bank of the river holding the first line of Choupains. And then put the other 2 corps on the south bank of the river, 6 pontoon bridges, and supply those. And then the cavalry further on out, beyond Roswell, where Sherman couldn't have done it. Had that been the case, Sherman would have had a heck of a time getting across the Chattahoochee River. But when they get there, Hood's like, "I don't like these." Other guys are like, "What about the Mason and Turner's Ferry down there?" Well, yeah, we cover from the opposite bank by putting part of our troops down there on the opposite bank, firing down the high ground in the river valley. I can take you there and show you a line of trenches, and one Choupain on that side of the river is still there. And that's what planned. But then Johnston misconstrues what Shoup wants to do, and they extend the river line another 3 or 4 miles and put everybody, except for the militia and the cavalry, on the opposite banks. And then Shoup is like, "Oh God, who am I working for here?" I mean, he was horribly disappointed, because Johnston did defend it. He tells who's the senator from Texas? Wigfall. Yeah, Louis Wigfall said, "Dude, Jeff Davis is going to honk at you. You better do something." And as he sends the email like, "Hey, I can hold this for 30 days." And like 5 days later, Sherman's already crossing the river and he's falling back. And that's when the wheels start in motion, where he gets fired up in mid-July. But he does defend it, just not correctly. Yes, I'll get you. He was first. Let me get you first.
I have a real basic question.
Sure.
When do you think the South was seceded? At what point in time?
When Atlanta falls,
And that would be,
logistically,
what's the date of that?
September 2nd.
Okay, all right.
When I do the Atlanta program, I've got a picture of what was left of the 80 cars of supplies, 28 of which held ammunition. And his chief of staff failed to get him out in time before Sherman cut the railroad at Jonesboro, so they blew it up. And had Hood had those supplies to start the Tennessee campaign, he would have been in a much better position. His logistics for that camp. I'm working on an essay book with 2 other guys, Tennessee historians, and we're going to write a bunch of things about the Tennessee campaign that nobody goes into on the handle logistics, and the Union Navy, which nobody talks about. There were 8 gunboats and ironclads sitting on the Cumberland River going, "Come on, Hood, come across if you think you're going to make it to Kentucky. We'll guarantee you're not going to Kentucky." The only reason he gets across the Tennessee River is he puts his pontoons to the east side of the Muscle Shoals where the gunboats can't get over. They're looking at him, they're throwing long-range shots trying to hit him. Nah, we're over here, you can't get over to us. That's why we put him here, we know where the shoals are. That's why he crosses right there. So, and I'm going to look at Hood's logistics, which are a joke, an absolute joke. That's why I argue the campaign's got 0 chance of success, and why Eric Jacobson goes, "But we depend on it." I said, "Eric, the story's even more dramatic if you go from that angle. You're missing my point." Yes, sir, behind you. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
I was just wondering about the Kentucky campaign. There being only a division in Nashville, was there, or were there any attempts to take Nashville?
There wasn't anything there, so he's up in Kentucky. Everything's either over in northwestern Mississippi or West Tennessee, or they're up in Kentucky with Smith and Brown.
But I mean, as Buell pulled back, why was there no attempt on the part of the Southern?
Because everybody was up in Kentucky. They'd already maneuvered into Kentucky, thinking that Buell would, when the word came, when Breckinridge is coming up to reinforce him, the part of the thing he's supposed to do is, if Nashville has been abandoned, get into Nashville. But it's not, so that's why he stops at Murfreesboro.
But one division that we're not
There's still defenses, you still got big guns at Fort Negley and Fort Casino and Fort Houston. It's not something an infantryman wants to do. Not wanting to do that. I asked James Lewis, the historian of Stones River one time, I said, instead of doing the Battle of Franklin, what would it take his 35,000 men and attack Fortress Rosecrans with their 8,000? He just started laughing. There were more heavy guns at Rosecrans than there were in Nashville. There were 52. And you can look at the atlas, the OR atlas, and it's got a plot in there, and it shows how they sighted them out to 2 miles. They tore down every building within 2 miles and sighted their artillery, pre-sighted their artillery. They knew exactly what to do. They had all the supplies they needed because they had quartermaster stuff, commissary stuff, ammo, all kinds of stuff in Fortress Rosecrans themselves. They could have stayed there for a month.
So Nashville was number 1 on the supplies and Rosecrans was number 2?
In the west, in the East City Point, when Grant gets to City Point, that becomes a big thing. Grant doesn't have a problem. He's got secure water links from the industrial center, New York, Boston, everywhere he's drawing his supplies from, right to City Point, and just the wharves. Just unloading there, whereas Sherman's got railroad lines. One more.
So Greg, following up on what you answered to Abby about what Hood could have done or should have done before even entering Tennessee in '64. Lately, I have heard and read several talks and read several things trying to defend Hood.
Sam Hood?
Yeah, saying that Hood had no alternative but to make that frontal assault at Franklin.
Oh, at Franklin?
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
I have learned, I thought, it's like, no, forces will give me a division, we'll ford the Harpeth. I've been kicking Wilson's tail since I crossed the state line, I can do it again. The Harpeth River you see in Franklin now is not the Harpeth River of 1864, it was wider. They filled it in. And it was in flood stage. That's why Schofield was trying to rebuild the bridge to get across, because you couldn't ford it. So the argument, now that I know that, and Rick Williams, Rick Warwick, the Williamson County historian, showed me some pictures after the war of the Harpeth, and it's significantly wider, especially over by Carnton, all that stuff. And there's a place, a housing division called Forest Crossing, where Forrest was looking at crossing the Harpeth River, and he says, oh, it's like 2.5 to 3 times wider than it is now. And when you're in flood stage, because of rain, and you've got swift current and things like that, it makes it hard to get across the river, especially in infantry. If you might be going in this deep and the current's real strong, unless you're running, trot lines across to hang on to ropes type of stuff, and horses could have maybe done a little bit better. But you're going to go up against an infantry division, Wilson's cavalry, and the guns at whatever fort is there north of Franklin. Granger, yeah. So you've got, his right flank's pretty well covered. I just think you just don't make the attack, and I just think that, I know what he's trying to do. He's trying to bag Schofield. If I can destroy Schofield, I'll get his supplies and all this kind of stuff, because he's not living off the land because there's nothing to eat. The land's picked bare. This is why you don't do winter campaigns in the musket era, unless you're ready to pre-position your supply line. That type of stuff. I just argued that the campaign had no hope, just no hope. And the part I'm going to do on the logistics, I'm going to prove why it had no hope. How many of you know, and there's only one essay ever written about this a number of years ago in Military Affairs, and I think Ed Marsh wrote it, Ben Gerson, ever hear of that guy? The Horse Soldiers movie? Well, he did another great raid in the Civil War. December 1864, riding out of central Mississippi and hitting the Mobile, Ohio Railroad, basically from the state line down to the Okolona area, and smashing Hood's depots. There was a little battle called Egypt Station that was there, where there were some galvanized Confederates that they captured. He smashes that line. And he's got detailed report, how many rifles, how much food, how much ammo we destroyed and blew up. By the time Hood gets back across the river, he's out of supply. There's nothing there. Nobody talks about that. The only book that I've seen is Ben Cooling's trilogy on the war in Middle Tennessee, Middle Kentucky, and Middle Alabama. Fort Donelson, Key to the Confederate Heartland was volume 1. Fort Donelson's Legacy was number 2. A brilliant book, and I haven't read his third one yet because I haven't had time, but it's about to the battles of Franklin and Nashville and beyond. He goes into Hood's logistics in there. None of the other Tennessee campaign books do, not to his level. And that's why I'm going to run it, because I'm into that kind of stuff. My head thinks like that. And it's from a logistic point of view. He could not supply that army. So what's he got as Bruce at? What are you going to do? you defend your supply region. You maybe pick off one of Sherman's columns. That's what I would have done, is is Sherman gonna go to Savannah knowing that Hood's on his tail? Who knows? Maybe he's gonna rethink that.
Stay put with the full.
Yeah.
That's right.
Remember how we won the Revolutionary War? The Continental Army was in being. Fought only when we had a good chance of maybe beating the British or blooding their noses. We lose the Army, it's all done with the crying. The Army is in being. As long as the Army is in being, we're still in the cause. That's what we got to keep in mind. Thank you very much.